On Halloween night in 2001, a young mother named Rachel Prescott vanished from her quiet Ohio suburb without a trace. Her disappearance stunned the community, leaving behind a confused 2-year-old daughter and a closet of unanswered questions. 21 years later, a tree removal crew working along a wooded backroad discovered something chilling: a faded pink bunny mask stuffed deep inside the hollow trunk of a long dead oak. It was the same mask Rachel had worn the night she disappeared. A long-buried secret, finally coming to light. Before we unravel the disturbing truth behind Rachel's disappearance, do me one favor. Hit that like button and subscribe. But only if this kind of story pulls you in like it does me. I'm building something real here, case by case, story by story, and I want you here for every haunting detail. Let me know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it in your corner of the night? Because sometimes the darkest stories hit hardest when the world is asleep. The year was 2001, and in the sleepy town of Bellwood, Ohio, Halloween had always been a big deal. Front lawns glowed with orange string lights, children scurried in costumes along sidewalks, and parents trailed behind with hot cider and flashlights. That year, 26-year-old Rachel Prescott planned to take her daughter Melanie, barely 2, on a short round through their cul-de-sac before meeting friends for drinks. Rachel was dressed simply but playfully: jeans, boots, and a pink felt bunny mask she'd made herself. Neighbors remembered her laughing with another mother by the mailbox, her daughter wobbling beside her in a lion onesie. That was the last confirmed sighting of her. Sometime between 8:30 and 9:15 p.m., Rachel vanished. Her purse was left on the kitchen counter. Her car remained parked in the driveway, and Melanie was found the next morning asleep on the living room couch with a piece of candy still in her tiny hand. Police combed the neighborhood. The woods behind the subdivision were searched by volunteers. Bloodhounds were brought in. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, no known enemies. Rumors began to swirl. A late-night lover's quarrel, a spontaneous runaway, even abduction. But there were no suspects, no arrests, no evidence, just a missing mother. Rachel's case went cold. Her name was added to a national database of unsolved disappearances, and Bellwood eventually moved on. But one person never could. Melanie Prescott had spent her life walking through a house filled with ghosts, not the kind that slammed doors or whispered in the dark. These were quieter. The kind you feel when you reach for a parent's hand and it isn't there. The kind that hums silently in photo albums and half-finished scrapbooks left behind on the shelf like unanswered questions. At 23, Melanie knew her mother through fragments, a dozen photos, 3 home videos, and the kind of stories people tell to avoid the hard parts. She had a beautiful laugh. She loved hot chocolate in the fall. She adored you. That was the extent of what most people could offer. What they didn't say, the silence that always seemed to follow her name, said just as much. Rachel's disappearance wasn't just the worst thing that had happened in Bellwood in years. It was a wound that never quite healed right. For Melanie, it was an invisible bruise she carried with her everywhere. School plays, graduation, birthdays. She'd look out into the crowd and wonder, would she have clapped louder than anyone else? Her father, Aaron, never spoke about that night. He moved them away from the neighborhood within the year. He remarried by the time Melanie turned 5. His new wife, Christine, was kind, patient, and tried her best. But there was always a space at the dinner table that didn't quite feel filled. Melanie grew up hungry for answers. In high school, she'd sneak onto online forums about missing persons. She read cold case blogs at night, memorizing the names of girls who disappeared just like her mother. She once wrote a letter to the Bellwood Police Department begging them to reopen the case. They replied with a form letter and an apology. By the time she was in college, majoring in psychology, ironically, Melanie had buried the obsession under textbooks and long nights at the campus library. She told herself it wasn't healthy to live in the past, that whatever happened was beyond her control. But the questions always lingered, tucked into the corners of her mind like shadows. Did she run away? Was she murdered? Was someone still out there, just living with what they did? Melanie never fully stopped wondering. So when the phone rang on a cool afternoon in October, almost exactly 21 years since her mother vanished, she nearly didn't answer. The number was local, unfamiliar, and she assumed it was another spam call. It was a contractor's number, tree service. Nothing that should have mattered to her, but something, a flicker of instinct maybe, made her press the green button. "Melanie Prescott?" the man asked. His voice was rough, cautious. "Yes?" "This is going to sound strange. I think you need to speak with the police about your mom." She sat in her car outside the police station, engine idling, her fingers locked around the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. The detective who met her, Detective Carla Mendez, was professional but kind. Her badge read Columbus PD, which confused Melanie at first. Bellwood didn't have the resources for a cold case division, but Columbus did. Apparently, Rachel's file had been shuffled around in recent years. A new push to reprocess evidence using updated forensic tech. Nothing had come of it. Until now. "We got a call from a tree removal company," Mendez explained. "They were clearing out a line of diseased oaks for a development project. This was 2 days ago. One of the trunks was hollowed out inside. Something stuffed in it." Melanie's breath caught. What was it? The detective reached into a manila envelope and slid a photo across the table. It showed a decaying pink bunny mask. The color faded, the fabric torn in places, but unmistakable. "That was your mother's Halloween costume, correct?" Melanie nodded slowly, feeling her throat tighten. "Yes, she made it that year. Said she didn't want to be scary because I was still little." Mendez leaned forward. This mask, it had something inside it. A folded piece of paper. "The writing is faint, but our lab is working on enhancing it. You'll be notified as soon as we know what it says." Melanie couldn't look away from the photo. That mask had been gone for 2 decades. Now it sat in an evidence bag somewhere, pulled out from the belly of a dead tree. "Where was it found?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. "Wilderness tract just outside Bellwood. About 2 miles from your old neighborhood. Close to a trailhead, but far enough in that no one would have stumbled across it by accident." Melanie blinked. "That area, I used to play there." The detective's face shifted. Not surprised, but perhaps understanding. "A lot of the locals did. It was undeveloped back then, easy to hide something." The word hide made Melanie flinch. She left the station with a folder full of release forms and a head full of ghosts. The mask, the note, the woods, all of it pulling at something inside her that had never stopped grieving. Her mother wasn't just missing anymore. She'd been hidden. That night, Melanie sat on her childhood bed, scrolling through old photos again. There was one of Rachel holding her as a toddler, both of them dressed for Halloween. Melanie in her lion suit, Rachel in the bunny mask. She hadn't seen that photo in years, but now it took on a different weight. What had seemed like a moment of warmth now carried an eerie chill. The last picture ever taken of her mother. The mask smiling for the camera. Hollow, soft, empty. She zoomed in on the background. Trees, a fence. Faint details of a backyard she could barely remember. She studied every corner, searching for something she didn't even know how to name. Maybe it was nothing, but maybe it was something. Melanie didn't sleep that night. Not really. She stared at the ceiling for hours, wondering if the discovery of that mask was the end of the mystery, or just the beginning. The woods outside Bellwood hadn't changed much in 21 years. There were more fences now, private property signs hammered to trunks, and the faint rumble of a new bypass in the distance. But the trees still grew thick, tangled in places with creeping vines, and the trails still twisted in ways that confused even long-time locals. Melanie stood at the edge of the clearing, heart thudding, her boots crunching dry leaves beneath her. Detective Mendez had arranged for her to visit the site quietly, no media, just Melanie, Mendez, and one of the tree workers, a man named Hal Warner, late 50s, weather-beaten and cautious with his words. "This the one," Hal said, gesturing toward the stump like it was a crime scene, which, technically, it now was. The trunk was massive, almost 5 feet across, rotted out from the center. A jagged slit down one side revealed where the tree had split under the pressure of decay and time. "I was cutting through the bark, just trying to clear the limbs for the county. We'd tagged this one for removal a year ago. Didn't think twice about it," he said, wiping his palms on his jeans. "Then I see something pink in the hollow. Thought it was a doll at first." Melanie approached slowly, her eyes locked onto the exposed cavity of the trunk. It was darker than she expected, like a mouth half silenced by earth and bark. "She was here," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. Mendez stayed a few steps behind, watching her with quiet empathy. "This spot isn't far from where your mother was last seen," she offered. "It's just beyond the old power line path." Melanie nodded. She remembered. As a child, she'd wandered through these trees with friends, building stick forts and pretending the woods were enchanted. She had no idea she'd been playing so close to a secret buried in silence. "There's something else," Hal said carefully. "After the police came and took the mask, they scanned the area. One of the cadaver dogs marked on a pile of soil nearby, right where the roots had grown thickest. They found fabric, burned fabric, partially buried." Melanie turned, startled. "Burned?" "Just scraps. No bones, but they match the type of blouse your mom was last seen wearing. There was also a necklace." Mendez stepped in then, pulling out a plastic evidence sleeve from her satchel. Inside was a photo, a delicate silver chain, its charm shaped like a tiny heart. The metal was rusted, dulled, but unmistakable. Melanie's breath caught in her throat. "She wore that every day," she whispered. "My dad gave it to her for their anniversary. I used to play with it when I sat in her lap." Mendez gave her a moment before asking the next question. "Would you be willing to submit a DNA sample? We're going to test the fabric and the necklace clasp for biological traces. Your sample will help confirm if there's a match." Melanie agreed without hesitation. Part of her was numb. Another part buzzed with a nervous current that wouldn't stop. She'd imagined for years that some forgotten object would surface. A phone, maybe, or a piece of clothing. But she'd never expected something so deliberate. The bunny mask hadn't just been discarded. It had been stuffed inside that tree, wedged in tightly like someone wanted it hidden, but not lost. And the note? She turned to Mendez. "Has the lab pulled anything from the paper yet?" "Some. It's slow work, but we've got fragments." The detective pulled out a second photo. It was a high-contrast scan of the note recovered from inside the mask. Much of the ink had faded, but a few words were legible. "Told you not to. And he'd ruin everything." Melanie stared at the photo, chills crawling up her spine. "Who's he?" she asked quietly. "We don't know yet," Mendez admitted, "but we're reviewing people connected to your mother. Anyone she had tensions with. Friends, co-workers, old neighbors." Melanie exhaled, eyes still on the photo. "This wasn't random. Someone wanted her gone." Mendez gave a slow nod. "That's what it looks like. And if that mask hadn't been found, none of this would have come back into the light." They spent the next hour combing the area, retracing steps from where Rachel could have entered the woods. Melanie followed a narrow trail that curved behind the backyards of the older homes. The path was overgrown now, but not impassable. Back in 2001, it would have been open, even inviting. "This was the shortcut," Melanie murmured, pointing. She used to take it to meet her friend Megan. 2 blocks through here, and you'd come out behind the gas station. Mendez took notes. Was there any conflict between her and this Megan? Melanie hesitated. They had a falling out. Something about a man. I don't know all the details. I was too young. The detective raised an eyebrow. We'll be following up on that. Melanie looked back at the tree trunk. The hollow cavity gaped silently, like it was waiting to be filled again. She shivered. There's a reason someone chose that tree, she said. They didn't just drop it on the ground. They placed it inside, like a time capsule. A warning, Mendez added, or maybe a confession. That evening, back in her apartment, Melanie sat cross-legged on the floor. Old case notes and family photographs spread around her like a shrine. The image of the bunny mask haunted her, not because of what it was, but what it meant. Someone had carried it. Someone had walked into those woods in the dead of night, carrying a secret, and decided this was where they'd hide the evidence of what they'd done. The mask, the note, the necklace. Each clue spoke not just of the past, but of intent. This wasn't someone fleeing. This wasn't someone panicking. It was calculated, controlled, human. Melanie picked up the last photo ever taken of her mother. Rachel smiling behind the bunny mask, arm wrapped around a tiny Melanie in her lion costume. Her eyes locked on her mother's, frozen in time. "I'm going to find out what happened," she whispered. And this time, she had a place to start. The wind carried the dry scent of leaves and old earth, rustling the bare branches like whispers from the past. Melanie stood alone at the edge of the trailhead, staring into the forest that had once been a playground, now a crime scene draped in silence. It was early November. Most of the vibrant fall color had drained from the trees, leaving the woods brittle and pale. She stepped forward, her boots crunching the frost-dusted underbrush. The air was colder here, the shadows longer. The tree trunk that had held her mother's bunny mask was still marked with orange flagging tape, the surrounding area cleared and cordoned off by police earlier in the week. It looked like a wound, deep and rotted, half split open. Melanie hadn't come to see the tree again. She'd come for the path behind it. There was a faint indentation in the earth, mostly lost to time and weeds, but still there if you knew what to look for. A narrow track that led deeper into the woods, curving back toward the northern edge of Bellwood. She remembered walking that way with her mother as a child, just the two of them. Rachel would point out squirrels and give Melanie acorns to hold like treasures. Now every creak in the trees felt different, like someone might be watching. She walked slowly, carefully. Her goal was clear: retrace the steps Rachel might have taken. Not the ones she was supposed to take, but the ones that made sense if she'd been meeting someone she trusted. Melanie passed an old, rusted-out water pump and a cluster of low boulders that had once been the base of a kid's fort. She stopped at the fork where the trail split, one path toward the gas station, the other deeper into the woods. She turned left. The second trail was narrower, thicker, almost overgrown in places, but Melanie knew it had once led somewhere important. 10 minutes in, she found it, the clearing. It was smaller than she remembered, just a ring of trees and a few rotted fence posts that suggested a structure had once stood there. An old tool shed or shack, maybe, long since torn down. She wasn't alone. Detective Mendez was waiting for her, notebook in hand, having followed a separate path from the other side of the property. "I figured you might come here," Mendez said, not unkindly. Melanie exhaled. "She used to bring me here when I was really little. Said it was her thinking place. You remember it clearly?" "Not really, just the feeling of it, the quiet." Mendez walked the perimeter slowly. "We found signs of fire here. Scorch marks in the dirt. Not recent, but definitely intentional. Someone burned something in this clearing years ago." Melanie looked at the ground, picturing her mother's blouse, the one found partially charred near the tree trunk. "Could this be where she died?" she asked quietly. Mendez didn't answer right away. "Possibly. Or it could have been a staging area, a place where someone brought evidence to destroy." Melanie turned in a slow circle, taking in the trees, the silence. This was someone she knew. That note in the mask. He'd ruin everything. That wasn't about a stranger in the dark. The detective nodded. That's what we think, too. We've started re-interviewing people from the original investigation. Friends, neighbors, people who knew your mom. Melanie's gaze darkened. Megan O'Neill. Mendez didn't flinch. Yes, she's on the list. We've already reached out. Melanie folded her arms. They had a fight. I remember it. I didn't know what it was about back then, but it was right before Halloween. My mom was upset. She didn't say why. We found a voicemail your mom left on Megan's landline, Mendez said, flipping open her notebook. Dated October 29th. The transcript's incomplete, but she says something like, "You need to tell him. I'm not going to cover for you." Melanie's heart thumped. Tell who? We're working on that. They stood in silence for a moment. The wind picked up again, scattering leaves across the soil. Then Melanie's eyes narrowed. What's that? She asked, pointing toward the base of a tree near the clearing's edge. Mendez followed her gaze. Together they approached the trunk, where something metal glinted faintly beneath a blanket of decomposing leaves. Melanie knelt, brushing the debris aside with trembling fingers. It was a flattened coffee can, the old kind with a plastic lid. Mendez stepped in, snapping gloves on, and gently pried the lid off. Inside was a bundle of paper wrapped in faded duct tape. They exchanged a look. Back at the station, after processing, the papers revealed more than either of them expected. It was a journal, not Rachel's, Megan O'Neill's. The entries were erratic, sometimes written in all caps, other times barely legible. But the theme was consistent: jealousy, bitterness, resentment. Rachel was mentioned dozens of times. October 19th. She thinks she's better than me. He always looks at her, not me. She's trying to take him away. October 26th. I saw them talking behind the store. She smiled at him like she knew. I hate her, I hate her. And then chillingly on October 30th. She said she was going to tell. I told him. He said we have to fix this. No turning back. Melanie stared at the transcript in her lap. Her hands were numb. She knew something, she said. About Megan. About him. Mendez nodded. We believe your mother threatened to expose them. It might have been an affair, or something else. Something bigger. Whatever it was, they felt cornered. And they killed her for it, Melanie said hollowly. Mendez's voice softened. We're building the case now, but this is real progress. For the first time in her life, Melanie felt it. Not closure, not yet, but momentum, movement toward truth. The forest hadn't given up everything, but it had given enough. Enough to know that her mother hadn't just disappeared. She'd been silenced by people she trusted, in a place that once felt safe, and now the past was coming undone. One leaf, one root, one journal page at a time. The bunny mask had haunted Melanie for days. It sat now in an evidence locker inside the Columbus PD Forensic Division, sealed in a clear plastic bag, tagged and cataloged. But in her mind, it remained vivid, not just as a symbol of her mother's final night, but as the carefully placed clue that had reignited the investigation. It hadn't been dropped, forgotten, or discarded. Someone had hid it, with intention. And then there was the note, faded, weather-worn, nearly illegible, but not silent. Melanie returned to the police station on a Wednesday morning, summoned by Detective Mendez. The forensics lab had finalized their analysis on both the mask and the scrap of paper it held. She sat in the small consultation room, hands clasped tightly in her lap as Mendez slid a new folder across the table. It felt heavier than the others, not physically, but in weight. We were able to enhance the writing with digital light processing and ink differentiation techniques, Mendez began. It's still incomplete. The ink bled and broke down over time, but we recovered enough. Melanie opened the folder with shaking hands. The photo showed a torn scrap of notebook paper, the edges curled, the ink a mix of deep black and faded gray. 3 lines were highlighted in red. I told you not to come here. He said she'd ruin everything. She won't leave. She said she's going to the police." Melanie's eyes lingered on the last sentence. "She was going to report them," she murmured. Mendez nodded. "That's the working theory. Your mother found out something. We believe she gave someone, possibly Megan, an ultimatum. And that ultimatum cost her her life." The silence hung between them. "Do we know who he is?" Melanie asked. Mendez exhaled. "We have a few suspects, but we're narrowing in on one, Jack Hanley, Megan's boyfriend at the time. He lived just 3 streets over from your family in 2001. He had a prior for domestic assault, a sealed juvenile case, worked nights, claimed to have an alibi for Halloween night." "But if Megan wrote the journal," Melanie said slowly, "and Rachel confronted her about Jack, then they both had motive." "Exactly. We believe Megan lured Rachel to the woods. She may have told her she'd come clean. Instead, Jack was waiting." Melanie stared at the note again. The edges trembled in her grip. She was trying to do the right thing. "She was," Mendez said. "And that note, we think Rachel wrote it, in the moments before she died. She tore a piece from her notebook, or maybe something nearby, stuffed it into her mask as a message, in case someone found it." It hit Melanie like a tidal wave. Her mother had known she wasn't going to make it out of those woods. And still, somehow, in those final moments, she left a trail. "She was brave," Melanie whispered. "Yes," Mendez said, "she was." Later that day, Melanie sat in the back corner of the Bellwood Public Library, sifting through digitized copies of the local newspaper. She'd already read every article about her mother's disappearance, but now she was looking for something different. Patterns, gaps, names that came up more than once. One headline caught her eye. October 24th, 2001. Dispute between Bellwood residents over zoning changes escalates. She skimmed the article. It mentioned Jack Hanley, listed as part of a local crew protesting development near the same wooded tract where Rachel's mask was found. Megan O'Neill's name appeared too, quoted briefly as opposing the planned walking trail. Melanie frowned. They didn't want people walking back there, she said to herself. Back then, that land had been wild, unclaimed. The county had proposed expanding access with a paved path and lighting, a proposal that had quietly died by November. She flipped the pages forward. A follow-up article noted that the town council had shelved the project indefinitely due to local resistance and budget constraints. But Melanie no longer believed it was just about zoning. She believed Jack and Megan had pushed to kill the project because it would bring people too close, to where they had hidden something, to where they had hidden her mother. The next morning, Detective Mendez called again. "They've agreed to interviews," she said. "Megan and Jack separately, but they know we're onto them." Melanie arrived at the station an hour later, heart pounding. She didn't expect to be in the room. She wouldn't be, but she wanted to be close, to know. Megan O'Neill arrived first. Her once honey blonde hair was now dyed a harsh black, tied in a tight bun. She looked older than her years, lines creased at the edges of her mouth. She wore no makeup and a dull green sweater. She refused counsel, said she had nothing to hide. But under questioning, her story began to unravel. She admitted to seeing Rachel the day before Halloween, said they'd argued about a man, nothing more. But when Mendez presented her with a printed excerpt of the journal, her own words, Megan went pale. "You can't prove I wrote that," she snapped. "We found your fingerprints on the metal lid," Mendez replied calmly, "and the writing matches your school records. But more importantly, Megan, it's time." Megan's composure cracked. Her shoulders sagged. Her voice turned brittle. "I didn't kill her," she said. I told him she was going to the cops. I didn't know what he'd do." "Who?" Mendez asked, though they both already knew. "Jack," Megan whispered. Jack Hanley was arrested that evening. In his garage, investigators found a box of old belongings. Inside was a second mask, a lion mask, the one Melanie had worn as a toddler. He had kept it, for reasons no one could quite explain. Guilt, arrogance, or the sick need to hold a trophy. Melanie stared at the evidence photo through tears. Her mother had fought, had tried to expose the truth, had left a message behind. And now, finally, someone was listening. The first time Melanie heard the name Walter Brinkley, it meant nothing to her. An elderly man, retired plumber, lived on Ridgeview Drive, the same block her family had lived on when she was a toddler. He'd been in his 60s back in 2001, quiet, lived alone. Not someone anyone had suspected, not someone even mentioned in early police reports. Until now. It was Detective Mendez who brought him up during one of their follow-up meetings at the station. "We reviewed every original call log and neighborhood statement from the days following your mother's disappearance," Mendez explained. "Most people said the same thing. They heard nothing, saw nothing. But Brinkley..." He filed a brief tip. It was marked non-actionable at the time. Melanie furrowed her brow. What kind of tip? He said he saw a pickup truck idling at the edge of the woods around 9 p.m. Halloween night. No lights on. Parked for several minutes, then drove off fast. He didn't get a plate number and no one followed up with him. He figured it was just kids. Melanie leaned forward. Was it Jack's truck? "We think so," Mendez said. "We pulled DMV records. Jack Hanley owned a silver 1992 Chevy CK. Fits the description. And Brinkley's detail, the dent on the driver's side panel, matches a body shop invoice Jack filed 2 months later." It wasn't a confession, but it was a nail. Melanie asked to speak with Mr. Brinkley directly. The old man's house hadn't changed in 20 years. A single-story brick ranch with faded green shutters and an overgrown front hedge. A plastic jack-o'-lantern still sat near the stoop, now half caved in from age. Melanie knocked twice. The door opened slowly. Walter Brinkley stood there, frail but upright. His white undershirt was tucked into khakis held up by suspenders. His expression was wary at first, but softened when Melanie introduced herself. "You're Rachel's girl," he said quietly. Not a question, a memory. "Yes, sir." He invited her in, motioning to a sun-faded armchair across from a dusty TV set. "I've been expecting this," he said after a pause. "Didn't think it would take 21 years. Melanie took out her notebook, more as a comfort than a necessity. "Can you tell me what you saw that night?" Brinkley nodded, leaning forward with stiff fingers pressed together. "It was Halloween. I used to sit on the porch and hand out candy. Around 9, the kids had thinned out. I was about to close up when I saw headlights flash through the trees back behind the houses. Didn't think much of it at first." He pointed toward his kitchen window. "You can see part of the woods from there. There was a truck, parked maybe 50 feet in. No lights on, just sitting there. Figured it was kids smoking or doing dumb things. But then someone came running." Melanie's stomach turned. "Running?" He nodded. Couldn't see the person clearly. Just a figure, fast from the clearing to the truck. They got in, slammed the door, and peeled out fast. Too fast for a quiet neighborhood. He looked at her, guilt in his eyes. "I didn't think it was anything criminal. Not until the news broke the next morning, when I heard your mom had gone missing." Melanie felt a lump rise in her throat. "Why didn't the police follow up?" "They came by." "I told them. Young officer didn't even write it down at first. Said it probably didn't mean anything. No one else saw it. Said I must have gotten the time wrong." Mendez had confirmed it. The original report had been lumped into unverified witness claims. But it wasn't unverified anymore. Now it was context. A thread that connected Rachel's last known location with a real person. A man who had a motive, a connection, and a truck. "You said you saw someone running," Melanie said gently. "Do you think it was Jack?" Brinkley squinted. "Can't say for sure, but I saw him around. He had that slow, wide gait. The guy running had the same, big, heavy-footed. And the truck? Definitely his kind. Chrome grille, big dent on the side." Melanie reached into her bag and pulled out a photo, a still frame from Jack's high school yearbook, scanned and sharpened. Brinkley stared at it a long moment. That face? Yeah, that looks like him. That testimony, coupled with the physical evidence and the recovered journal, became the cornerstone of the renewed case. Detective Mendez shared the developments with Melanie the next day. Brinkley's statement, while circumstantial, is consistent with the timeline and the forensics. We believe Rachel met Megan in the woods that night. Jack either followed her or was already there. Melanie swallowed. And then they killed her. We believe Megan tried to convince Rachel to keep quiet. Rachel refused. Jack reacted violently, possibly strangled her. We're still waiting on DNA from the blouse remains. It wasn't the full picture yet, but it was forming. A grim, human portrait of betrayal, fear, and panic. Jack Hanley had always been impulsive. Prone to violence, Mendez explained. He'd been in bar fights after 2001, picked up for aggressive behavior, though never convicted. He and Megan had broken up in 2003. She had remained in Bellwood, working odd jobs, always on the edges of town life. No one had ever really looked at them closely. Until now. Later that week, Melanie walked through her old neighborhood, passing by the empty lot where her childhood home had once stood. The new owners had razed it years ago. Now it was just a stretch of grass with a single swing set swaying in the wind. She paused near Brinkley's house. He was watering a patch of brown shrubs near the edge of his porch. When he saw her, he raised a hand. "I'm sorry," he said again. Melanie stepped closer. "You didn't do anything wrong. I should have pushed harder back then. You saw what others didn't. You remembered. That matters." He looked away, eyes moist. "Your mom. She was kind, always waved when she passed by, always asked how I was doing." Melanie felt her chest tighten. She didn't deserve what happened. "No," he said. "She didn't." As she walked back to her car, Melanie thought about how close the truth had always been. Just a few houses away, a few careless assumptions, a few blind spots in an overwhelmed investigation. But now, those blind spots were being lit, one by one. Her mother had left a message, a mask, a note, a legacy of quiet courage. And one man, who had simply kept watching, had helped unlock the next piece of the truth. Melanie didn't know what she expected when she pulled up in front of Megan O'Neill's house. She sat in her car for nearly 10 minutes, watching the chipped paint on the shutters, the sagging gutter, the brittle grass that hadn't been watered in weeks. It was a house that had once been vibrant. Her mother had brought her here as a toddler. There had been flower boxes and Halloween decorations, laughter behind the screen door. Now it felt like something caved in on itself. Megan had been released on conditional supervision after her initial interview. While the investigation into Jack was active and building toward a likely indictment, Megan remained in legal limbo, not formally charged, not exonerated. Melanie didn't care about legal categories. She cared about the truth, and she believed Megan knew it. She rang the doorbell. The door opened slowly, revealing Megan, tired, hair unkempt, eyes wary, her lips pressed together in a thin line. "I thought you might come," she said. Melanie took a breath. "I need to understand, not just what happened, but why." Megan hesitated, then stepped aside. "You have 5 minutes." The living room was dim, cluttered. Old magazines, half-packed boxes. A single framed photo of Megan in her 20s stood on a dusty shelf next to a cracked candle jar. There were no signs of anyone else. No partner, no children. She gestured for Melanie to sit, then stood near the window, arms crossed. "You already know what I did," Megan said flatly. "What I didn't do." Melanie looked at her carefully. "I know you were afraid. I know Jack had a temper. But you helped him. You covered for him." Megan let out a low, humorless laugh. "Helped? I didn't help. I froze. I told him what Rachel said, that she was going to the police, that she wouldn't keep our secret. I didn't think he'd—" She trailed off. "You told him. And then you let it happen." I didn't let anything, Megan snapped. You think I had control over him? He was angry before I even said anything. He thought Rachel had already talked. Melanie's voice was cold. So you watched him kill her? No. Megan's voice cracked. I wasn't there when it happened. He told me after. I didn't believe him at first. I thought he was trying to scare me. Then I saw her necklace. He threw it at me like it meant nothing. Melanie's stomach twisted. She remembered that necklace, the silver heart her father had given Rachel. Now she knew Megan had held it too, as evidence, as warning. You still didn't go to the police. Megan looked out the window, jaw clenched. Do you know what it's like to carry something like that? To feel it in your throat every time you speak? I was 23. I was stupid. I thought if I said nothing, it would fade, that he'd go away. And he did, eventually. But the guilt didn't. No, she said softly. It didn't. They sat in silence for a moment. Melanie broke it. What was the secret? What was worth killing for? Megan turned, eyes glassy. It wasn't just the affair. It was complicated. Jack was angry at your mom. He said she threatened him, said she'd go to his boss. He worked under the table, wasn't supposed to be near kids. He had a record from when he was a teenager. Melanie froze. A record? Megan nodded slowly. He never told me the full story, but I think your mom found out something that would have ruined him. He panicked. She was the one person he thought would follow through. Melanie felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. This wasn't just jealousy or rage, it was fear, survival. Her mother had confronted a man with a violent past, a man who believed she could destroy his life. And instead of running, Rachel stood her ground. Megan sat down across from her. Her voice dropped to a whisper. She was the better one. Between us. Always was. Melanie searched her face. Then why did you hate her? Megan looked away. Because she had what I didn't. Kindness, strength. People trusted her. Jack, he liked her too much, and I hated how that made me feel, like I was invisible. Melanie's voice softened. You could have saved her. Megan nodded. I know, and I'll carry that. Later that night, Melanie drove to the edge of Bellwood and parked at the old community center, now abandoned. She sat in the dark, headlights off, staring at the cracked pavement where she once learned to ride a bike. Her mind spun with what Megan had said, the tension, the resentment, the sense of inferiority that had festered quietly beneath years of forced smiles and polite nods. It wasn't one moment that killed her mother. It was a slow build. Tiny fractures in trust, jealous glances, whispered confessions, a web of ordinary emotions taken too far. It was human, tragically human. Rachel had tried to be the anchor for those around her. She stood up for what was right, protected people. And in doing so, she threatened the fragile control others tried to maintain. Melanie thought about the way people remembered her mother. Strong, warm, honest. She realized now how dangerous those qualities could be to the wrong people. She pulled out her phone and opened her voice recorder. She spoke into the silence. October 31st, 2001. My mother walked into the woods to protect someone. She didn't come out, not because she was lost, but because someone couldn't face the truth. This isn't about ghosts or shadows. This is about the people who loved her and the ones who envied her. This is about silence and what it costs when we let it win. She hit stop and stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she stood, feeling the weight of her mother's courage settle on her shoulders. The past wasn't buried anymore, and Melanie was going to make sure it never would be again. It started with a storm. Heavy rain had passed through Bellwood over the weekend, flash floods pooling on the outskirts, downed branches littering roads, and enough mud to turn every walking trail into a soggy mess. Detective Mendez called Melanie on Sunday morning with a quiet urgency in her voice. The runoff unearthed something, she said. Melanie drove out to the woods immediately. By now, she knew the path by heart, the twisted trail behind the old lots, past the tree where the bunny mask had been found. This time, the police had expanded the search radius another 20 yards, using ground-penetrating radar and dogs trained to detect both remains and disturbed soil. When Melanie arrived, the area had been cordoned off with yellow tape. Forensics techs were clustered around a large tree root system recently exposed by the rain. The earth had slid down the embankment, revealing something unnatural beneath the surface, a hollow, square cavity beneath the roots. Detective Mendez met her near the perimeter. "It's a storage trunk," she said, "metal, rusted shut. We're opening it now." Melanie's heart dropped into her stomach. A few minutes later, she stood beside Mendez as two techs pried the lid off with a crowbar. The hinges groaned. The smell hit them first. Old moisture, mold, and something else harder to describe. A trapped sense of time. Inside were layers. The top layer held burned, crumbling fabric, a shirt, possibly a cardigan, charred beyond recognition. But tucked beneath, protected by the fire's failure to consume everything, was a collection of objects. A broken flip phone, a pair of cheap sunglasses, and a second piece of the silver heart necklace. The chain separated, the pendant bent at the edge like it had been stepped on. Melanie froze. "That's hers." The techs moved methodically, lifting each item with tweezers, placing them in separate containers. At the very bottom of the trunk was a small bundle wrapped in melted plastic. Once opened, it revealed a faded leather wallet. Her mother's. The ID card was still visible beneath the cloudy plastic window. Rachel Prescott. Mendez looked over at Melanie. "This seals it. There's no doubt anymore." Melanie couldn't speak. She knelt beside the trunk, staring into the rusted container, into the physical remains of a moment she'd never witnessed, but had lived with her entire life. Her mother had been here, not just in the woods, but here, buried in a box, hidden beneath a tree, abandoned by people who knew her name. This was the grave Rachel never received. The contents of the trunk were logged into evidence that afternoon. Forensics confirmed within days that the burned fabric matched the blouse Rachel had been seen wearing that Halloween night. The phone, though corroded, still had a partially preserved SIM card. Its data was being recovered piece by piece. One text message remained visible in the message queue. "I'm coming. Don't lie to me again." Sent 7:46 p.m., October 31st, 2001. It had been sent to Megan's number. When confronted with the evidence, Megan finally broke down in a recorded interview. "Yes, she was coming to see me," she confessed. "I told her I wanted to fix it. But Jack, he was already there, waiting. I thought maybe he'd scare her, rough her up. I didn't know." She paused, swallowed. "He panicked after, said we couldn't leave anything behind. We had to clean it up. He brought that trunk from his garage, made me help him bury it. I didn't even know what was inside until later. I never looked again." Jack's arrest followed within 48 hours. With the combination of Megan's testimony, the physical evidence from the trunk, the journal, the mask, the necklace, and Walter Brinkley's eyewitness account, the district attorney's office built a strong second-degree murder case, rooted in conspiracy, tampering with evidence, and obstruction. Melanie sat through every pretrial hearing. Jack Hanley barely looked at her. His eyes were cold, sunken, defiant. He pled not guilty. But the case was airtight. He wouldn't walk away this time. A month later, Melanie returned to the tree one last time. The weather had turned. Snow dusted the ground in a thin, crisp layer. The roots had been partially cleared away, the area prepped for further excavation, but the trunk itself, rusted and half buried again, had been left in place temporarily under a tarp. Melanie stood above it, staring down at what had once been her mother's coffin in everything but name. She held something in her hands, a single photo of Rachel holding her as a toddler, both smiling, the bunny mask pushed up like rabbit ears. "I found you," she whispered. "Not just physically, but as a person, as a woman who had stood up for what was right, even when it put her in danger. A woman who had risked everything to protect a child, not just her own, but possibly others Jack might have hurt. Melanie placed the photo on the trunk gently, weighed down with a small rock. I'll make sure they remember who you really were. Back at the police station, Mendez handed her a copy of the final evidence report. The summary read, "Victim likely lured to wooded location under false pretense, strangled. Personal effects destroyed and buried in concealed metal container. Co-conspirators took measures to delay discovery. Motive appears to stem from fear of exposure and potential legal jeopardy. By perpetrator Jack Hanley." Melanie read it twice, then folded it. That was the official version. The truth she knew went deeper. It lived in the silence of people who didn't speak up, in the weight of guilt Megan would now carry for the rest of her life, in the small, ordinary decisions that spiraled into tragedy. But it also lived in resilience, in the message her mother left behind, in the mask, the note, the necklace. Every item had told a story, and together, they'd finally told the truth. The courtroom was quiet when the verdict was read. Jack Hanley, once a forgotten name in a cold case file, now the center of a high-profile trial, sat motionless as the judge delivered the sentence, 25 years to life for second-degree murder, with additional charges of tampering with evidence and conspiracy to obstruct justice. He didn't look at Melanie, not once. Megan O'Neill had agreed to a plea deal in exchange for her full cooperation. She pled guilty to obstruction and accessory after the fact. The judge sentenced her to 5 years, with the possibility of early release based on time served and psychiatric evaluation. Melanie sat in the front row through it all, hands clenched in her lap, the silver heart pendant around her neck. Not her mother's original, that had been logged into evidence, but a replica she had made after the necklace surfaced. A way to carry Rachel with her, always. There was no applause, no catharsis, just quiet. The kind that comes when something long unfinished finally reaches its end. In the weeks that followed, life began to stretch out again, cautiously, like someone waking from a long sleep. Melanie went back to work at the small counseling clinic where she interned. She found herself connecting more deeply with her clients, especially those dealing with grief, unresolved trauma, or the ache of unanswered questions. She knew that ache better than anyone now. She also started speaking publicly about her mother's case, not the gory details, but the lessons it left behind. Her first talk was at the Bellwood Community Center, newly renovated after years of neglect. The room was small but full. Neighbors, students, local police officers, reporters, people who had lived in the town for years and never truly understood what had happened in their own backyard. Melanie stood at the podium, photos of Rachel displayed on the projector behind her. "My mother was more than a victim," she began. "She was a person who tried to do the right thing. She stood up for what was right, even when it cost her everything. She left behind a trail, not because she wanted revenge, but because she believed someone would care enough to follow it." She paused, eyes moving across the room. For 21 years, no one did. But now we know, and knowing the truth, even after all this time, means something. It brings peace, not just to me, but to this town, to all of us. Afterward, several people approached her quietly, offering condolences, sharing memories of Rachel, or simply saying, "I'm sorry I didn't speak up." Melanie didn't hold it against them. The silence hadn't belonged to any one person. It had been a collective hush, born of fear, apathy, or simple disbelief, but it had cost them all something. And it was finally broken. Detective Mendez met with her for coffee a few days later. It was the first time they saw each other outside a courtroom or a case file. "You did something a lot of people never do," Mendez said. "You brought the truth into the light." Melanie smiled faintly. "I didn't do it alone." "No," the detective agreed, "but you didn't give up." They sipped their drinks in companionable silence. "You planning to stay in Bellwood?" Mendez asked eventually. Melanie looked out the window, watching a child in a yellow coat chase leaves down the sidewalk. "I don't know," she said honestly. "For the first time in my life, I don't feel stuck here. That's a strange kind of freedom." Mendez nodded. "Whatever you decide, just know. Your mom would be proud." Melanie blinked quickly and nodded. "Thank you." 1 week later, she walked alone to the spot where it had all begun. The tree, the one where the bunny mask was found, had been removed for forensic preservation, but the place itself remained, quiet, overgrown, untouched again. Melanie knelt and placed a small plaque in the soil. It read, "In memory of Rachel Prescott, a mother, a friend, a fighter. You were never forgotten. We followed your light." She sat there for a while, feeling the breeze stir the bare branches overhead. It was cold, but not unkind. For years, Melanie had imagined closure as a dramatic, sweeping moment. She thought it would feel like justice, loud and righteous, but it wasn't like that. It felt more like silence. This time, the good kind. The kind that fills a space when everything necessary has finally been said. Later that night, Melanie lay on her couch, journal in her lap, the heart necklace cool against her collarbone. She wrote, "My mother disappeared on Halloween night, 2001. For years, I lived in the shadow of that night, trying to fill in the blank space she left behind. Now I know the truth, not just about how she died, but about how she lived. She tried to protect someone. She tried to stand up for something right. In doing so, she showed more courage than most people ever will. This isn't just a story about a crime. It's about the cost of silence, about the ways people fail each other, and the ways we can still make things right. My mother's story isn't unfinished anymore. It's just finally being told." She closed the journal and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere, beyond the pages, beyond the evidence bags and courtrooms, her mother had finally been seen, not as a headline, not as a missing woman, but as Rachel, a person, a mother, a light. They say the dead can't speak, but sometimes they leave behind just enough, a hidden clue, a final message, or a quiet act of defiance, for someone to find the truth they were never able to tell. Rachel Prescott didn't vanish without a trace. She left behind a trail, and her daughter followed it. Not all justice comes quickly, but sometimes it does come, because someone refuses to stop asking questions. If you believe these stories deserve to be heard, consider subscribing. We share real mysteries, the kind shaped by memory, silence, and truth finally revealed. Hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. There are more stories like Rachel's, and some are still waiting to be told.